ketogenic diets have been shown to significantly help with depression, significantly help with anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, epilepsy, ADHD. We're seeing some benefits.
Today I sit down with Dr. Shawn Baker, orthopedic surgeon, founder of Revero, and author of The Carnivore Diet.
I'll tell people I'm doing keto. I mean, it's the only thing that works for me, actually.
But what happens when you take keto one step further?
I want you to convince me here that I should try carnivore.
It is basically a diet consisting of primarily just animal products. So it would be meat, it would be fish, it would be eggs, it would be dairy products.
Dr. Baker emphasizes the simplicity of the carnivore diet and its potential health benefits.
They are uniquely satisfying. Most people will notice better gastrointestinal function without the fiber.
For Dr. Baker, diet is only part of the larger picture as he challenges what he calls a flawed disease management system in modern medicine.
What does disease management mean? Oh, you mean I'm supposed to put them on meds for the rest of their life? I think if you treat the root cause, then the disease is not a problem.
Urging people to take back control of their health through lifestyle changes.
I think food is critically important. Sleep is important. I think exercise and activity are important. I think the sun is incredibly important. Then I think also having a purpose in the community around you. You can empower yourself to heal.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick.
Shawn Baker, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Hey, it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Thanks for having me.
And it's an amazing time, actually. The food pyramid, the dietary guidelines have been updated for the first time in really time immemorial is perhaps a little bit too long. And they've changed, and I think they've changed in a way that might actually work for you. Why don't you tell me about that?
Yeah, well, as you guys know, RFK came in and he said he's going to flip the food pyramid upside down. And you know, it's interesting when you look at the graphic that they submitted. You know, you see that upside down pyramid. That was done very intentionally, I believe. And RFK has said he has been on a carnivore diet more or less for quite a while now. He's really happy with that. And as you read that, you know, in English we read, you know, left to right, top to bottom. The first thing you come to on that food pyramid now is a big old ribeye steak. And it's not just any steak, it's actually a ribeye steak, which I thought was I think that was intentional. And, you know, the main focus was a shift to greater emphasis on protein and we've demonized red meat in particular over the last really half century. And so I think we've kind of shifted away from that. And I think
but why ribeye?
Well, you know,
why is that intentional?
Well, yeah. I think because it's an acknowledgement that animal fat is actually not what's killing us, as we've been told for many years. You know, we hear this sort of relationship between saturated fat and cholesterol and heart disease, and there's a couple leaps that are being made that don't actually show endpoints. You know, when we look at like randomized controlled trials on red meat, reducing red meat, increasing red meat, those don't show any real increase in cardiovascular disease. So it's all these sort of intermediary biomarkers that they sort of make this argument on, or epidemiologic data, which is unfortunately what most of nutrition science is composed of, which is just weak data, unfortunately. As someone who had a science background, there's pure sciences, math, physics, and so on and so forth, and then there's more of the social science and nutrition science, which is some people would say almost a pseudoscience in many ways.
Tell me a little bit about this. You know, I take it you've looked through the dietary guidelines in some detail, and of course, you know, we know that meats and saturated fats are up, but the biggest deal is, as they say, eat real food is the slogan, right? How does that grab you?
Well, you know, I had commented several years ago because every 5 years we update the nutritional guidelines, and there are hundreds of page long documents, and they have these really sort of somewhat arbitrary rules that they go by. You know, it's based on the science they think they have, and it's, you know, no one really goes to the grocery store carrying a dietary guidelines pack with them, and no one's going to continue to do that. I had commented several years ago, I think that we should probably align our dietary guidelines with something like what Brazil had. If you look at Brazil's dietary guidelines, it's very similar to what we have now. It says, cook at home, avoid, you know, hyper-processed, ultra-processed food, surround yourself with people you love, you know, cook in a family environment, you know, don't eat at restaurants as much, and avoid some of the marketing. And I think that it's very basic, it's very generalized, it's not very specific, but I think that's all we really need. I don't think we need these rigid, you know, rules, which unfortunately, that drives our policy. You know, policy in the school systems, anything that takes federal money that feeds people has to abide by. And so I think the sort of the overall message of let's just stop eating I like to call it human pet food. So much of the grocery stores, really, it just reminds me of that. And if you look at, like, remember when all these fake meats came out, you know, the Beyond Meat, who's, you know, if you've seen their stock price, like, it went from $2.50 down to below $1 now. And if you look at the ingredients, it's hard to distinguish that from dog food. It really is when you put the ingredients side by side. And so we've been consuming, you know, this ultra processed food, which again I call human pet food. It acts kind of like a recreational drug, and I think that's really what it is. A lot of our food has become very similar to recreational drugs in the way we use and abuse them, and that's something that I think getting away from that is undoubtedly going to, you know, assuming people will do it. Now, again, the guidelines are out there now. The execution, that's the hard part. How do we execute this? And as you probably know, here in DC, there's a lot of stuff that slows process down.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, you know, well, that something you mentioned is really interesting, because it's one thing, you know, you can have this food pyramid and you can look at it and say, roughly, I know what I should do according to these guidelines. That's one thing. But the letter, the small details all impact, you know, for example, the massive amounts of funding that go towards school lunches, for example, and so forth, and what that will be. To me, in a way, I wonder, like, that almost feels like the big game changer. Because I remember looking at, you know, maybe years ago, looking at like some of the hospital food, I was like, I can't believe they give this to people. I mean, I didn't even think about this stuff in detail, but I was like, really? This is like what they give at a hospital? Shouldn't it be like good food? You know, because it's probably like nutrition, to have nutrition in it or something like that. You know, so there's this seemingly profound shift that should happen, right? Or like you tell me what you think.
Well, you know, again, that upside down food pyramid is a consumer-facing document. The 10-page letter that was, you know, signed by Secretary Rollins and Secretary Kennedy basically said this is how we think you should eat in general terms, and that's what hopefully the average American will do, and they'll feed their family that way. Now, the details of the guidelines, you know, really reduced added sugar. They cut back on the grain recommendations. They still leave a 10% saturated fat cap, which a lot of people in the low-carb keto sort of stratosphere are kind of grumbling about a little bit.
Why don't you explain to me, like, how a keto diet works? Like, how is that, and what's actually happening, and how that's different from normal?
Sure. Yeah, so keto diets have been around for, gosh, I mean, they've been used therapeutically since the 1920s. They were first shown to have significant impacts on epileptics, and so you may be familiar with some of the origins of that story. There's something called the Charlie Foundation, where you know, that was, you know, talking about that significantly.
Well, diabetes, autism. I mean, a whole range of impacts.
There's you know, and this is, you know, some of the great work that's being done by the Bazooki Foundation, funding a lot of the science research around this. We're showing that ketogenic diets have been shown to significantly help with depression, significantly help with anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, obviously epilepsy, ADHD. We're seeing some benefits in patients with dementia. So it has this tremendously beneficial cognitive effects on ketosis, seems to. And this is something that, you know, 5 years ago, if you said that, people thought you were nuts, because how can a diet impact my childhood trauma, or whatever the issue might have been. But it, you know, our brain is an organ just like our liver is, just like our heart is, and it is clearly influenced by what we put in, you know, what we feed it. So, but ketosis, you know, again, babies are born in a ketogenic state. This is sort of our natural state when we're born. You know, obviously, humans are omnivores. I write in my book, The Carnivore Diet, humans are omnivores. There's other people out there making the argument that humans are carnivores. I approach it as this is a therapeutic tool that is incredibly beneficial, and it helps for resetting things. But as far as what does being in ketosis do? It regulates, you know, we have a more steady sense of energy. You may have noticed that on a ketogenic diet. You don't have these ups and downs and the crashes, and I think that impacts our mood lability. You know, if we're more stable when we're kind of evened out, it's kind of, a lot of people call it a keto calm, or some people call it a zero carb zen, where they're just kind of happy and chilled out. They're not like, you know, bouncing around so much. There are impacts on fat metabolism. We know that being in ketosis sort of interacts with something called hormone-sensitive lipase to promote fat metabolism. So there are, you know, clear benefits to ketosis for many, many people.
Yeah, and I mean, the bottom line is you're burning fat because there's no carbs to burn, and that's the next thing that's burning. Is that?
Yeah, basically, that's kind of the hierarchy. When we start to get low on stored sugar in the form of glycogen or blood glucose, ketones become more useful. So we always have some glucose in our body. We always have some ketones. We always have some free fatty acids. We always have some lactate floating around as different sort of energy substrates that we can metabolize, and that just shifts it in one direction or the other. Mm-hmm. And the question is, what is optimal for humans? I think that's a debate that many people have. There's a lot of people that they like the carbohydrates, and for a lot of people, and I'm not here to tell you that everybody needs to be on a carnivore diet, because I don't agree with that. But I do think that many people, more people than you think, would benefit from it. And it's educational. If you do it for 3 months, you will learn a heck of a lot about your body. Right. You'll learn about how your body interacts, what foods cause problems. My background is in orthopedic surgery, so I spent years, replacing people's knees and doing trauma surgery and hips and shoulder scopes and knee scopes. And one thing that I remember, a few people were telling me that, hey doc, whenever I eat bread, my knee hurts. And I thought they were nuts. I just thought they were some crazy person. Whatever. Let me look at your MRI, right?
Right.
But then, years after years of doing this, one of the most common things I see, and as I'm about to turn 60, and so I'm running, jumping, doing all these athletic activities because my knees don't hurt anymore. My back doesn't hurt. And that is in large part impacted by the foods I eat. So the foods we consume, a lot of people, they'll wake up the next morning with a sore shoulder or a sore neck, and they'll think they slept on it wrong. It's probably, maybe it was a chocolate cake you had last night. So if you start thinking about it that way, you'll start to discover that food impacts you in ways you would never even attribute to that. And most physicians are unaware, because we have no training on that.
Shawn, one moment, we're going to take a break, and folks, we're going to be right back. And we're back with Shawn Baker, author of The Carnivore Diet. The thing that I know you for, and probably millions of people know you for, is the carnivore diet. Right. And I'm quite interested. I myself generally do keto. I had a few years recently where I stopped doing keto. I can tell you it was a bad idea. I'm back to doing keto again, and I'm pretty, when I do it, it's great. It's simple. It's not a lot of rules. You just keep the carbs down, whatever you do. And once in a while you can get some carbs, that's fine, but mostly keep them down, at a very, very low level. Now, but carnivore seems to be another step up. And so in a way, I want you to convince me. I want you to convince me here that I should try carnivore.
Well, as I said, my background as a physician, my goal is to take people that are unhealthy and make them healthier. And I think that is something that we're able to do through diets like a carnivore diet. And we use ketogenic diets too as well. But certainly for people that struggle with following routines, that struggle with complexity, counting macros and trying to figure out if something hits.
Yeah, that's me. That's me to the T.
Right. So very much it simplifies that. And you mentioned as your background in evolutionary biology that a lot of people will argue that a ketogenic state was essential to survival for a long period of time while humans were dealing with ice age conditions, particularly out throughout southern Europe and other parts. And so the only way to really reach a ketogenic state, given the resources they had at that time, would probably be from hunting animals. I don't think there are a lot of mangoes and things like that growing in Europe during the ice age. I think that would be I think most people would agree with that. So it is something that a lot of people, like I said, people that have struggled with food addiction, and probably some people estimate about 14% of the population, kind of runs parallel to alcoholism, struggle with what we would consider food addiction. And I think it's a real issue, and a lot of people would readily admit they have problems with addiction of types of food. How
do you define that entirely? Because you obviously you have to eat,
right? And
so how much liking of eating makes it addiction?
Well, I think if we look at just addiction in general, what defines an addiction? It's like, are we addicted to breathing? Well, yeah, we have to do it, but I think if we knowingly are harming ourselves, and I think most of us know that if I sit down and eat chocolate chip cookies all day, it's not going to do anything good for me, but I can't stop it. I'm compelled to do it because the flavor is so overwhelmingly, it gives me this sort of reward system. So I think in the face of the fact that you are, gaining weight, becoming inflamed, developing, chronic diseases, and you continue to do that, to me that represents an addiction. It was interesting. I read a study a few years ago about the fact that a lot of it was, I think it might have been millennials, might have been Gen Z folks, were eating less and less breakfast cereals, and we're thinking, well, that's probably a good thing because it's a bunch of sugary garbage most of the time. But the reason was not because they were concerned about the health. The reason is because it was too much work, because they had to actually rinse a bowl and pour it in a dish, where what they want is something, rip a package open, shove it in their mouth and throw it away. And so we've gotten to the point where the convenience food has also become such a problem for us.
Right. Absolutely. I think, and that's one reason why I like meat sticks so much, because I can just have them in my bag, right? When I'm one of these people, I get focused, work, and then 8 hours can pass, and just the meat sticks are what does
it's interesting. The meat sticks are actually becoming one of the more popular snack food items. They're one of the most rapidly growing markets right now for that. So that's right. Good news in my view.
Okay, good to hear that. And I always try to get the grass-fed, sort of I don't know if organic every time, but listen. So okay, carnivore diet. It's not just red meat. Can you just give me a picture of how it works broadly? I know that people should, do this in consultation with a professional and all this stuff, but how does it look like?
So prior to the carnivore diet being called the carnivore diet, and I was the guy that popularized that name when I wrote the book back, 7 or 8 years ago. And before it was called a zero carb diet. So it was basically people avoiding all carbohydrate. It kind of was a sort of a heretical outcast from the keto group. They were kind of kicked out of keto because they were too extreme, right? And I ended up following some of these, listening to some of these people on social media, and I thought they were absolutely crazy. I said, "You guys are crazy. This is nuts. Aren't you going to get scurvy? What about fiber and all those types of things?" So basically, it is basically a diet consisting of primarily just animal products. So it would be meat, it would be fish, it would be eggs, it would be dairy products, it would be anything that sort of comes from an animal.
Let's say you convert to that, but you still eat a lot. You're still going to get fat.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
I know that anytime I start eating certain foods, I just can't stop. I'm just one of I'm probably have this sort of food addiction. There's some people that are that can moderate things.
Oh no, I'm like you. That's why I'm thinking I'm a food addict, because I kind of get compulsive with it.
Yeah. It's like, there's only 10 of them left. You might as well finish. There's only 10
exactly.
Oreos left. You count it. Well, okay, I ate an extra one. Now there's only 2 left. I might as well finish the whole bag.
But come to think of it, I never overeat meat sticks. I don't think I do anyway.
They are uniquely satisfying. When we start talking about some of these new drugs, the GLP-1 drugs, a lot of people are using right now, and they're the next $1 trillion drug. I'm sure you're aware of everybody on the Ozempic and all those other drugs, and so they work on hormones. It's not like, because when people say it's all about calories, but yet these drugs really don't have much to do with calories directly. I mean, ultimately they impact how much we eat, but it's a hormonal effect. So we are stimulating these hormones that suppress our appetite. GLP-1, GIP, and some of the other medications that are being used. And food does that to a degree as well, not to the extent. I mean, these are 100x, but I mean, again, you're getting obviously side effects. You're getting issues.
Well, exactly, because none of this is worry-free entirely. Correct. Whenever you take one of these drugs, there's some portion of people that react to them.
Yeah, I mean, some people are going to have significantly negative outcomes. Most people will do okay. I think the data on that shows that most people don't tolerate it long term. Most people end up stopping. I think about 70%, at least in some of the studies I've shown. And the unfortunate thing is most people will rapidly regain most of the weight back. Right. So it is not a cure. It's one of these drugs, and this is the whole raison d'etre of the pharmaceutical industry. Create drugs people have to take for the rest of their life. So it's a never-ending profit model, and it's not like anything on there. And they're very open about that. They say, look, if you have hypertension, you're going to take your beta blocker, your diuretic the rest of your life, whatever it might be. That's just like that. So they're posing this as just another market that says obesity is a disease. You have it for the rest of your life, and the only solution is to continuously inject yourself with these medications ad infinitum. I would contend there's other ways, and there's probably better ways, and there's ways that are probably unfortunately not as profitable. But that's the reality.
But, you just mentioned something. I think as a general rule, right? Well, I'm going to throw this out there as an idea. Whenever you're thinking about some sort of intervention, ask yourself, is there a massive profit potential for a company in this thing? And if there is, look at it a little more closely. Maybe that's a good rule of thumb.
Well, I think the question, a lot of people, particularly when it comes to healthcare, because I think our healthcare, unfortunately, the incentives for the American healthcare system are really, they're really kind of perverse, quite honestly. And I think that the first question you ask is if you go to the doctor and you get diagnosed with, say, some autoimmune disease, you got Crohn's disease, or rheumatoid arthritis, you ask, doc, why? Why do I have this? You're not going to get a good answer. You're going to get something like, maybe it's genetic, we don't really know, it's unlucky, or something like. You don't get these good answers of why. And because we don't ask why anymore, we just sort of outsource everything to the pharmaceutical companies. They'll tell us how to treat it, how to manage those symptoms. We went from I think initially medicine was about curing disease, it was about creating health, to disease management, which I think was adopted somewhere in the 1990s or something like that. We started talking about disease management. I remember hearing that term for the first time some point in my career. What does disease management mean? What does that mean to manage someone's disease? Oh, you mean I'm supposed to put them on meds for the rest of their life? That's what disease management is. And I think, I believe that you can cure a lot of these diseases. I think you can, if you treat the root cause, if you remove the insult, the problem, then the disease is not a problem as long as you continue not to indulge in that. It's just like if I have a patient there that's hitting himself over the head every day with a hammer, he comes in complaining of headaches, and I just keep giving him aspirin.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hey man, why don't you just quit hitting your head over the head with a hammer? That might work too. Now the reality is, as an orthopedic surgeon, if I said, Jan, I need to replace your knee, right? I have literally millions of dollars of resources at my disposal to get that outcome. I can send you to the lab, I can send you to therapy, I can MRI imaging, X-ray imaging. I've got pre-op OR suite, $200 a minute that I'm spending in the operating room, and I can get your knee done, and then all the post-care, right? So I've got millions of dollars of research. But if I say, it'd be a good idea if you were to change your diet, walk a little more, work on your sleep, I get effectively zero resource for that. So I tell you to do it on your own, right? So I don't provide you anything. And it's not a surprise you're not successful at, because I didn't really do anything for you. So that's why I think what we're doing with our company is we're providing those resources so people actually can be successful at lifestyle. And I think if we change our healthcare system to allow for incentivizing physicians to actually get people healthy, to actually help them to make those lifestyle changes, we'll have a much better outcome.
So this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Perhaps you have a final thought as we finish?
I do, absolutely. I think if you are out there and suffering with some form of chronic disease, number one, don't outsource your health to anyone else. The healthcare system tends to be very disempowering for patients because they're told they have this weird disease and they don't know why. You're not told why you have it, and the solution is often just take these drugs for the rest of your life. That doesn't need to be the outcome for most people, and I think you can empower yourself to heal. It's possible through lifestyle. I think food is critically important. I think sleep is important. I think exercise and activity are important. I think the sun is incredibly important, how we mitigate stress. And then I think also having a purpose and a community around you. I think if you put those things together and you emphasize those and particularly dial in your food, more often than not you can significantly improve your quality of life and often put diseases in remission.
Well, Shawn Baker, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
All right, thanks again. Yeah,
hey, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining Shawn Baker and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.